How dare you defy me? Pick it up!
The plate left his hand before Regina finished setting the table. It struck the wall beside her head and burst into white pieces across the marble, and the whole dining room went still. Seo-jin stood there in his pressed shirt, breathing hard, waiting for her to flinch. Waiting for the tears. Every maid before her had given him the tears. Regina did not give him anything. She knelt down in her uniform and began gathering the broken pieces into her palm, one by one, careful not to leave a single shard where someone might step on it later. And as she worked, so quiet you could barely hear it over the hum of the chandelier, she began to sing under her breath. An old hymn, the kind her grandmother used to sing over a sink full of dishes in a small kitchen an ocean away. Seo-jin stared at her like she was something he could not solve. "Did you hear me?" he said. "I heard you," Regina answered, still gathering. The plate slipped. It happens. It did not slip. I threw it. "Then I'll clean up what you threw." She looked up at him then, and there was no fear in her face, only a kind of steady patience that unsettled him more than any scream could have. "Was there something else you needed?" There was not. That was the problem. There had never been a maid who looked at Seo-jin like he was a man having a bad day instead of a monster to be survived. He turned and walked out, and the sound of his own footsteps followed him down the hall like an accusation. Behind him, quiet as breath, the hymn went on. He did not know it yet, but the woman kneeling on his mother's marble floor was going to be the one who broke him. Not with anger, not with revenge, with something he had no defense against at all. Before we go any further, do me one small favor. If a story about grace meeting cruelty is the kind of thing that stays with you, take 1 second and tap that subscribe button. It genuinely helps more than you know, and I promise you are going to want to see where this ends. And while you settle in, tell me in the comments where in the world you are watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel, and I read every single one. Now let's get back to it. To understand what happened in that house, you have to understand the two lives that were about to collide inside it. The Beck estate sat on a hill above the city, behind gates that opened for almost no one. Chairman Beck had built the family's name into something people said carefully, in low voices, and he had built the house to match. Cold stone, long halls, rooms full of things worth more than most people would earn in a lifetime, and at the center of all of it, his only son. Seo-jin had been raised to believe the world owed him something, and for most of his life the world had paid up. He had never been told no in a way that stuck. He had never scrubbed a floor, never waited on anyone, never once wondered where his next meal was coming from. What he had instead was a temper, and a house full of people paid to absorb it. The maids came and went like weather. There was the young woman who lasted 9 days before he emptied a cup of coffee into her open handbag because she had set his schedule on the wrong side of the desk. She walked out that same afternoon and did not come back for her final pay. There was the older woman, gray at the temples, named Bak Nam, who had cleaned houses for 30 years and thought she had seen everything, until Seo-jin stood over her while she mopped and told her, in a flat and pleasant voice, that she mopped like someone who had given up on her own life. She finished the floor. Then she went to the staff bathroom, and the sound of her crying carried through the thin wall, and the next morning her locker was empty. Remember her name. She matters later, in a way Seo-jin could never have guessed. 11 of them, in a single year. Chairman Beck kept a list. He was not a soft man, and he did not keep the list out of kindness. He kept it because 11 maids in 1 year was a number that got noticed, and things that got noticed were things he could not control, and Chairman Beck did not tolerate what he could not control, least of all in his own son. Now here is the other life. Across the river, In a district the tour buses never troubled, Regina rented one room at the top of a narrow building, where the stairs complained under every step. The room held a bed, a small table, a single window that looked out on a brick wall, and a photograph she kept turned toward the pillow so it would be the last thing she saw at night. In the photograph, an old woman with silver hair and flour on her apron laughed at something outside the frame. That was the grandmother, the one who taught her the hymn. Regina had crossed an ocean 4 years earlier with 2 suitcases and a plan that fell apart inside a month, and she had been rebuilding from the wreckage of that plan ever since. She sent money home when there was money to send. She had learned to make one meal stretch across 2 days. She had learned that pride does not pay rent, and that a woman alone in a foreign city has to decide, early, whether the hardness of the world is going to get inside her or stay outside where it belongs. Regina had decided. She kept it outside. She kept it out with work, and with the photograph turned toward the pillow, and with the hymn, which she sang the way other people breathe. So when the agency called and said the Beck estate was hiring again, and told her the whole ugly reason it was always hiring, Regina listened to every word of the warning. Then she asked when they needed her to start. The head housekeeper met her at the service entrance. A thin woman named Mrs. Han, with tired eyes and a clipboard she held like a shield. "You understand the situation," Mrs. Han said. It was not a question. "I understand there's a young man who is difficult." Mrs. Han almost laughed. "Difficult? That's a generous word for it." She looked Regina over, taking in the calm of her, the way she stood without bracing. "No one lasts a week in this house. I want you to hear that plainly before you sign anything. Not 1 week. So do not unpack your heart here. Do the work, take the pay, and when he breaks you, and he will, do not blame me for failing to warn you." Regina considered that for a moment. "Where do you keep the cleaning supplies?" she asked. And Mrs. Han, who had warned a great many women and watched every one of them leave, felt something she had not felt in a long time. A small, foolish flicker of hope. She showed Regina to the supply closet, and as they walked the long service corridor, she noticed the new maid humming to herself, low and easy, a tune with no words that she could catch. "What is that you're singing?" "Something my grandmother sang," Regina said. "It helps me keep my hands steady, my mind quiet." "You'll need it quiet in this house," Mrs. Han said. That first day taught Regina the shape of the place. She learned which floors caught the afternoon sun, and which stayed cold no matter the season. She learned that the kitchen was ruled by a woman named Sue, who had cooked for the family 30 years and trusted no one new until they had proven they would not waste food. And she learned that there was a young maid, barely 19, named Hana, whose hands shook whenever Sojin's step sounded in the hall. Regina found Hana in the pantry that first afternoon, pressed into the corner behind the rice sacks, trying to make herself small, while Seo-jin's voice carried through the house, looking for someone to blame for a shirt pressed the wrong way. "Come here," Regina said quietly. "Stand behind me. Fold these while I count them. If he comes in, he speaks to me, not you. You keep your hands busy and your eyes down, and let me carry it." "Why would you do that?" Hana whispered. "You just got here. You don't even know me." "Because somebody should have done it for me once," Regina said, "and nobody did. Fold." He did come in. He found Regina counting linens with a young maid working quietly behind her, and he opened his mouth to unload the morning's temper, and Regina met him with such flat, unbothered courtesy that the anger had nowhere to go. He left without landing a single blow. And Hana, 19 and trembling an hour before, looked at the new woman like she had watched someone stop the rain with an open hand. That was Regina's first day. She made an ally, and she made an enemy, and she did both without raising her voice once. There was one door on the second floor that stayed locked. Regina noticed it on her first walkthrough, the way you notice a held breath. It was a bedroom, or had been, and the housekeeper's key ring skipped over it without a word. When Regina asked, Mrs. Hahn's face closed like a book. "That was the lady of the house," she said, "the chairman's wife. We do not go in, and we do not speak of it, and if you value your position, you will forget I told you even that much." Regina forgot nothing, but she nodded, and she moved on. And later that evening, passing that locked door with an armful of fresh linens, she noticed Seo Jin standing in front of it. Not touching the handle, just standing, very still, the way a man stands at the edge of a cold that he has decided never to feel again. He heard her footsteps, and his whole body changed, hardened, and he turned on her, with something ugly rising in his face, ready to make her pay for having seen him. Regina simply wished him a good evening and kept walking, and left him alone with the door. She did not know whose room it was, but she had buried people herself, and she knew grief when she saw a man standing guard over it. For 3 days, Seo Jin studied her the way a boy studies an insect he intends to pull apart. He gave her the worst of the work. The bathrooms first, all 7 of them, and when she finished them faster and cleaner than anyone before her, he told her she had missed a spot she had not missed and made her do them again. She did them again. She hummed while she did. He changed her hours without telling her, so that she arrived to find she was somehow already late, and he docked her for it. He criticized the way she folded, the way she poured, the way she breathed in a room he wanted silent. And through all of it, Regina met him with the same unbothered courtesy, which drove him closer to the edge than shouting ever could have, because a man like Seo Jin needs your fear to feel real, and she would not give it to him. On the 4th day, he found the edge. She was carrying a tray of tea across the study, a full pot and 2 cups on fine china, when he stepped into her path on purpose and put his foot where her foot was going. It was a small, deliberate, coward's cruelty. She went down. The pot went with her, and the tea, still scalding from the kitchen, poured across the back of her hand and her wrist where she had thrown her arm out to catch herself. The burn was immediate and real, a red bloom rising on brown skin, the kind of pain that whites out the world for a second. Seo Jin looked down at her on the floor of his father's study, and he smiled. "Clumsy," he said. The room held its breath. Hana, in the doorway, had her hand over her mouth, and everyone waited for what always came next. The tears, the apology, the resignation by morning. Regina rose to her feet. She was cradling her burned wrist against her body, and her eyes were bright with pain, but her voice when it came was level and low, and it filled the room to every corner. "You can throw a plate at a woman's head," she said. "You can burn her hand and call her clumsy. You can run off every person your father pays to take care of you, and you can stand outside a locked door every night, like a man visiting a grave, and pretend that makes you strong." She let that land, and she watched it land, and she saw the color leave his face at the word grave. "But I have buried people I loved with these same hands, and there is nothing you can do to me that life has not already done worse. So do your worst, young man. I'm still going to be here in the morning, and I'm still going to do my job, and you are still going to be exactly as alone as you are right now." She picked up the broken china. She walked out, and Seo Jin stood in the middle of the study, 28 years old and shaking, because no one in his entire life had ever once told him the truth to his face. What he did not know was that his father had been standing in the hall. Chairman Beck had heard the crash. He had come to see what his son had broken this time, and he had arrived in time to hear every word the maid said, and to watch his son have no answer for any of it. He looked at the red mark already rising on Regina's wrist as she passed him in the corridor, and he looked back at the study where his son stood frozen, and something in the old man's jaw set like cooling iron. He had been waiting a long time for something to reach his son. He had tried money, and he had tried silence, and he had tried disappointment, and none of it had touched the boy at all. Perhaps, he thought, it was time to try the truth. That night, before he decided anything, Chairman Beck did something he had not done in years. He climbed the stairs to the second floor, alone, and he stood in front of the locked door the way his son stood in front of it, and he laid his old hand flat against the wood. He was remembering a woman who used to sing on the other side of it. He had loved her, in his hard and clumsy way, and when the sickness took her, he had done the only thing a man like him knew how to do with a wound. He had sealed it shut and forbidden anyone to touch it, and he had told himself that silence was the same as strength. And he had watched, year after year, as his son learned that same terrible lesson at his knee, and carried it further than he ever had, into cruelty, into a house full of weeping women, and slammed doors. The maid had seen in 4 days what Chairman Beck had spent 11 years refusing to see. That the boy was not evil. The boy was buried, and someone was going to have to dig him out, or lose him for good. The old man took his hand off the door. He had made his decision. Chairman Beck called his son to the library the next morning, and he did not raise his voice once, which was how Seo-jin knew that this time was different. "You burned her," the old man said. "She dropped the tea. You put your foot in her path. Do not lie to me in my own house. I have overlooked a great deal, Seo-jin. The maids, the tempers, the money you spend proving to strangers that you matter. I told myself you were young, that grief makes men cruel before it makes them kind." He set down his cup. "But you are not grieving anymore. You are hiding, and you have decided that everyone in this house should bleed a little so that you never have to. Father, she is a servant. She spoke to me like she was my equal. She spoke to you," Chairman Beck said, "like she was your better, and she was right." He rose, and he was old, but he filled the room the way the house was built, to make him fill it. "So here is what will happen. From today, you have no allowance, no car, no cards, no name to hide behind. You will report to Mrs. Han at 6 each morning, and you will do the work of the staff you have spent your life tormenting. Every floor, every dish, every bathroom, and you will do it under the instruction of the one person in this house, with the spine to tell you the truth. You will answer to Regina." Seo-jin laughed. It came out thin. "You cannot be serious. I have never been more serious about anything in my life. You will learn what her days feel like, since you seem to enjoy them so much. And you will not touch a single privilege of my name again until I decide you have become a man I would trust with it. Or you can leave. The gate is there. But you will leave with nothing, because nothing is what you have earned." He did not leave. He had nowhere to go, and both of them knew it, and that knowing was its own kind of humiliation. So the next morning, at 6, Seo-jin stood in the service corridor in clothes that did not fit the moment, and Mrs. Han handed him a bucket and a set of gloves, and could not entirely keep the satisfaction off her face. And Regina, whose wrist was wrapped in clean gauze because she had dressed the burn herself, looked at the young man who had given her that burn, and she did not gloat, and she did not soften. Wring the cloth out until it stops dripping. If it drips, you're carrying water from one room into the next, and you'll be mopping the same hall twice. He did it wrong. Of course he did it wrong. He had never in his life made a rag do anything. The water ran down his forearms and soaked his sleeves and pooled where he had already cleaned. And by the third haul, his back had begun to ache in a place he did not know a back could ache. And his hands were raw, and the staff who passed him did not laugh out loud, but they did not need to. "You're pushing too hard," Regina said, watching him fight the floor. "You think strength is the thing. It isn't. It's patience. You work with the grain of it, not against. Same as anything worth doing. I don't need advice from you. No," she agreed. "You need it from someone. I'm just the one who's here." That first week nearly killed his pride, which was the point. On the second day he was set to the laundry, and he did not know that a red cloth does not go in with white linens, and he turned an entire load of the household's shirts, a soft, ruined pink. Sue found him staring at the tub of pink water, like it had betrayed him personally. She did not scold him. She simply told him that those shirts came out of the staff budget, not his father's, and that 3 people would go without their small monthly bonus to replace them, and she let him carry that instead of a punishment. It was worse than being yelled at. He had never once thought about whose money paid for what he ruined. On the third day, he was sent out on foot to the market to carry back what Sue could not have delivered, and for once in his sheltered life, Seo-jin stood in an ordinary line among ordinary people, in plain clothes, with no name and no car, and no one to move out of his way. A shopkeeper snapped at him for counting his coins too slowly. A woman with a stroller sighed at him for blocking the aisle. Nobody knew who he was, and worse, nobody would have cared, and he walked back up the hill with the bags cutting into his soft hands, and understood for the first time that the whole world he had lorded over had never actually been looking at him at all. It had only been looking at the name. Take the name away, and he was just a slow man in a market line, holding up the queue. On the 4th day he served at a small dinner, a thing he had attended 100 times from the other side, seated and served. Now he stood at the wall with a bottle in a cloth, and watched men he knew, men who had drunk his father's wine and shaken his hand, look straight through him, as though he had never existed. One of them, a man Seo-jin had considered a friend, snapped for more wine without lifting his eyes, and Seo-jin poured it, and the man never once saw the person pouring. That was the lesson the whole night taught him, standing invisible against a wall. He had been that man. He had looked through 100 people exactly that way, and never once wondered what it cost them to be looked through. On the 5th day, something small happened that he would only understand the size of much later. He was set to help in the garden, hauling bags of soil for the old groundskeeper, a silent man named Pil-soo who had tended the grounds since before Seo-jin was born, and had never once been thanked for a single season of it. They worked all afternoon without speaking, and near the end of it, Seo-jin, exhausted and filthy and past the point of performing for anyone, simply said, "How do you do this every day? My whole body hurts, and I have done it once." And the old groundskeeper looked at him with something that was almost pity and almost kindness, and said, "You get strong in the places you use. That is all. A man is only soft in the places he has never had to carry anything." Seo-jin thought about that for a long time. He had been soft in every place that mattered, because he had never once had to carry anything at all. He helped Pil-soo finish, and at the end he thanked him, and the old man went still with surprise, because in a lifetime on those grounds, no one from the family had ever said those 2 words to him. On the 6th day he came upon Mrs. Han in the corridor, and something made him stop. "I never learned your first name," he said. The housekeeper looked at him for a long moment, as if deciding whether the question was another trap. "It's Ji-woo," she said finally. "I have worked in this house for 19 years. You are the first person in this family to ask." He did not have anything to say to that, but he carried it with him the rest of the day, the weight of 19 years of a person he had never once seen. His friends heard about all of it, the way friends like his always hear about a fall. They came around less, then they stopped coming at all. The phone that used to never stop went silent, and the messages went unanswered, and the men who had toasted him in private rooms and laughed at every cruel joke he ever made, found, all at once, that they were terribly busy. So Jin told himself he did not care. He told himself a lot of things that first week, scrubbing floors under the eyes of a woman he had burned, in a house that had never once felt like a home. And still, at the edge of every long day, there was the humming, that old wordless hymn, drifting from whatever room Regina was working in, steady as a heartbeat. He told himself it annoyed him. He was lying, and some part of him already knew it. Let me stop you right there, because I need to know what you think. Here is a man who has been cruel to every person who ever served him, cruel enough to burn a woman's hand and smile about it, and now he is being made to walk in her shoes. So tell me honestly, down in the comments, does a man like that even deserve the chance to change, or has he already lost the right? There is no wrong answer, and I read every single one. Now let's keep going. The change did not come all at once. Real change never does. And it did not come in a straight line either, which is the part people forget. It began on a Tuesday, 3 weeks in, when Seo Jin dropped an entire tray of glasses in the kitchen and stood staring at the wreckage of it, waiting for someone to scream at him, the way he had always screamed at them. And no one did. Regina came in, took one look, and handed him the broom. Everybody breaks something eventually, she said. It's not the breaking that tells me who a person is. It's whether they pick it up. He picked it up. It was the first thing in his adult life he had ever cleaned that he had broken himself, and something about the simple justice of that sat with him strangely for the rest of the day. That same week, Regina let him see a little of who she was outside the walls of that house. They were folding sheets together in the late quiet, the work that goes easier with two, and he asked her, almost against his will, about the people she said she had buried. She did not answer right away. Then she did. My mother, first. I was younger than you are now. Then my grandmother, the one who taught me the song. She raised me after, in 3 rooms, on almost nothing, and she never once let me feel poor in the ways that mattered. Regina smoothed a fold with her palm. When she was dying, she was not afraid. She held my hand, and she told me that a person is not what happens to them. A person is what they decide to carry, and what they decide to set down. And then she asked me to sing to her, the song. So I did. I sang my grandmother out of this world with the same hymn she sang me into it. She looked at him. That is why I hum it, not because it is happy, because it is the sound of everyone I ever loved still with me. I carry them in it. That is what I decided to carry. Seo Jin, who had spent 11 years deciding to carry nothing so that nothing could ever be taken from him, had no answer. But something in him, some sealed and airless room, cracked open a window that night. There was a night that tested whether any of it was real, and it came from a direction no one expected. A distant cousin of the family, a man named Tae Yang, who had always circled the Beck fortune like a patient bird, came to the house for dinner while Chairman Beck was resting upstairs. He had heard the rumors that the heir had gone soft, that a foreign maid was running the household, and he came to see for himself and, if the rumors were true, to begin quietly positioning himself as the family's more suitable future. He watched Regina serve, and he did not like the ease of her in that house, the way the staff steadied around her, the way even the young master's eyes followed her. So he decided to put her back in her place, the way men like him always do, with a smile on his face and a knife in the words. He waited until she was pouring his water, and then he asked her, pleasantly, loud enough for the table, what a woman like her had done to make herself so comfortable in a house so far above her station. He suggested, still smiling, that there were only a few ways a woman with no name and no money made herself indispensable to a wealthy young man, and that everyone at the table could guess which one. The room went cold. Regina's hand did not shake. She set the pitcher down with great care, and she straightened, and she prepared to absorb it the way she had absorbed 1,000 cruelties before, alone, without help, because help had never once come. But this time it came. Seo Jin was on his feet before she had finished straightening. "You will apologize to her." His voice was very quiet, and the whole table heard exactly how quiet it was. "You came into my father's house while he sleeps. You sat at his table, you drank his water, and you insulted the one person in this family with more honor than everyone at this table combined. Regina has done nothing to make herself comfortable here except be the only honest person in a house full of people who forgot how. If you cannot see that, it is because you are exactly the kind of man I used to be, and I am ashamed enough for the both of us." He came around the table, and he stood beside Regina, beside the maid, in front of the family, and he did not move. "Apologize, then leave. You are not welcome to circle this family anymore. There is nothing here for you to inherit. I am not the weak point you were hoping for." Taeyang apologized, because there was nothing else to do in the face of it, and he left, and he did not come back. And Regina, who had braced her whole life to stand alone in moments exactly like that one, found herself for the first time standing beside someone who had chosen, without being asked, to stand in front of her. She did not say anything to him that night. She did not have the words yet for what it did to her, to be defended by the man who had once burned her hand. But something shifted in her too, in that moment. She had spent so long being the strong one for everyone else that she had forgotten what it felt like to be caught. Now she remembered. And it frightened her a little, how much she had needed it, and how easily this changed man had given it. 3 days later, he nearly threw all of it away. A man he had grown up with, the closest thing he had once had to a real friend, tracked him down and cornered him near the gate, out of sight of the house. And this friend offered him a door out, a room across the city, alone, a way to be the old Seo-jin again, free of his father's punishment and his father's rules. All he had to do was walk out the gate that night and leave the whole humbling behind. And Seo-jin wanted it. That is the honest thing. Months of aching hands and swallowed pride rose up in him all at once, and for one long moment, the old life held out its hand and he reached for it. He packed a bag. He stood at the top of the service stairs in the dark, bag in hand, ready to go back to being a man who never had to feel anything. It was Regina's voice that stopped him, not aimed at him. She did not even know he was there. She was down in the kitchen at that late hour, alone, on the phone with someone back home, and her voice carried up the stairwell, and it was not the steady voice she used in the house. It was cracked, tired, human. She was telling someone that she was fine, that the work was hard but she was managing, that she missed them more than she could say, and that she would send what she could next month, and that no, they should not worry, she was not lonely. She had made a kind of peace with the quiet. And then, when the call had ended, in the empty kitchen, thinking herself completely alone, Regina let herself cry, just for a minute. The strong woman who never gave him tears, giving them at last to no one, to an empty room, because she had earned the right to fall apart, where it would cost her nothing. Seo-jin stood at the top of the stairs with his bag in his hand, and understood something that rearranged him. She was not unbreakable. She had simply decided, every single day, not to break where it would hurt anyone but herself. The strength he had been trying for months to crack was not the absence of pain. It was a choice about what to do with it. And he had spent his whole life doing the exact opposite, spilling his pain onto everyone within reach, and calling that strength. He put the bag down. He did not go out the gate. He never told her he had heard her cry. But the next morning he did something he had never done before. He went looking for a way to give instead of take. He remembered Baknam, the gray-haired woman he had cut down months ago with a single flat sentence about her wasted life, the one who had left in the night with an empty locker. He had not thought of her since. Now he could not stop thinking of her. It took him 2 weeks of quiet asking to find where she had gone. She was cleaning offices at night on the far side of the city. Work that was harder on old knees than a fine house had ever been, because the reference she needed to find better had never come, because a young man's cruelty had chased her out a door with nothing. Suo-jin could not give her back the months. But he could do 2 things, and he did them without telling a soul, because he finally understood that a kindness announced is just cruelty wearing a nicer coat. He wrote her the reference himself, in his own name, honest and generous and true, and he had it delivered. And he took the first real money he earned, the small wage his father paid him for the staff work like everyone else, and he sent it to her anonymously, with a single line. From a house that owes you an apology, it did not have the character to give you in person. He signed no name. He did not need her thanks. He needed, for the first time in his life, to be the kind of man who did the right thing when there was nothing in it for him at all. That was the day So-jin stopped being sorry and started being different, and no one saw it happen, which is the only way you ever know it is real. After that, the walls came down slowly, in the ordinary hours. The house felt the change before anyone named it. Young Hana, who had once hidden behind rice sacks at the sound of his step, was the first to test it. One afternoon she dropped a stack of the good plates, the whole tower of them, and the crash brought the old fear flooding back into her face, and she braced for the young master she used to know. Instead, Seo-jin crossed the room, knelt down beside her, and began helping her gather the pieces, exactly the way a woman had once gathered pieces for herself, on his mother's floor without being asked. Everybody breaks something, he told the trembling girl, borrowing words he had earned the right to say. It is not the breaking, it is whether someone helps you pick it up. Hana stared at him like the sun had come up in the wrong direction. Then, slowly, she believed it. By the next week she was arguing with him about the proper way to fold a fitted sheet, and laughing when she won. And the sound of a maid laughing freely in that house was so strange and so new that Mrs. Han had to step into the pantry for a moment to collect herself. In the evenings, when the work was done, Seo-jin found that he had stopped dreading Regina's voice and started, without meaning to, waiting for it. They fell into a rhythm neither of them announced. She would hum, and he would find a reason to be in whatever room the humming came from. She taught him things that had nothing to do with cleaning, though they came disguised as cleaning. How to notice when a person was tired before they said so. How to leave a kindness where it would be found later rather than handed over for thanks. How to sit in a hard silence with someone instead of filling it. He told her things too, now. Small at first, then less small. He told her about a mother he could barely picture anymore, and how the not being able to picture her was its own kind of second loss. He told her he was frightened, some nights, that the man he was becoming would not last, that the old cruelty was only sleeping. And Regina, who did not lie to make a moment easier, told him the truth, that the fear itself was the proof. Cruel men do not lie awake afraid of being cruel. Only men who have changed lie awake guarding the change. You keep watch over it, she told him. That is all any of us can do. You do not get to be finished. You just get to keep choosing. And Seo-jin, who had always wanted to arrive somewhere final where nothing could touch him, began to make his peace with a road that had no end, because for the first time he was not walking it alone. And the night it finally broke all the way open, he was mopping the second-floor hall alone, and Regina was down at the far end changing the linens, and she began to hum, the same hymn as always. Except this time she let a few of the words slip out, soft, half to herself, the way you sing when you think no one is close enough to hear. Seo-jin stopped moving. The mop handle slid out of his hand and clattered against the floor, and he did not pick it up, because all the strength had gone out of his legs at once. Because he knew that him, not from a grandmother he had never met in a country he had never seen. He knew it from a woman with tired, warm hands who used to sing it to him in a room on this very floor, behind a door that had been locked for 11 years, on the nights when the great and terrible Chairman Beck was away, and the house was quiet enough for a mother to sing her son to sleep. "Where did you learn that?" he said. His voice did not sound like his own. Regina looked up, and she saw his face, and she set the linens down. "My grandmother, like I told you. Why?" And then she understood, because she was a woman who understood grief. "Seo-jin, whose song is it?" "My mother's." The word came out of him like something torn loose. "She used to sing that exact one, when I was small, before she got sick." He was staring at the wall, at the locked door just down the hall, and 11 years of a dam he had built stone by careful stone came apart in the space of a single breath. She died in that room, and my father locked it, and everyone learned not to say her name, and I decided the only thing worse than losing her was letting anyone see it. So I made sure no one ever got close enough to me to matter. I made myself into something no one could love, because you cannot lose what you never let yourself have. He sat down against the wall, this proud and cruel and hollowed-out young man, and for the first time since he was a boy behind a locked door, he wept. And Regina did not tell him to stop. She did not tell him it was all right, because it was not, and she was not a woman who lied to make a moment easier. She came and sat down on the floor beside him, close but not touching, the way you sit with someone at a graveside, and when his shoulders had finished shaking, she began again, quietly, to sing his mother's hymn all the way through. The words this time, every one. She sang it for him the way it had been sung for him once, a long time ago, in a room he had been too afraid to enter. And Seo-jin listened and let himself have it, and began, at last, to heal. That was also the night that Chairman Beck, passing the foot of the stairs, heard two things he had not heard under his roof in 11 years. His late wife's hymn, and his son, crying like a person, instead of raging like a wound. The old man did not climb the stairs. He stood at the bottom in the dark and let the sound reach him, and for the first time since the sickness took her, he let himself grieve his wife instead of guarding her, and the hard iron thing in his chest loosened by the smallest degree. He went to bed that night, lighter than he had in a decade, and the next morning he found the key to the locked room, which he had carried for 11 years and never once used, and he set it on the kitchen table where Regina would find it, with a single line in his careful old hand. "Open her room. Let the light back in. It has been dark long enough." There was one conversation still owed between the two men, and it came a few evenings later. Chairman Beck found his son in the kitchen, drying dishes, and for a while the old man simply stood in the doorway and watched, because he did not entirely know how to begin a thing he had never once done in 28 years. Finally, he sat down heavily at the small staff table, where he had never in his life sat before, and he said the hardest sentence he knew. "I taught you to be this way." Seo-jin turned. "Father, no. Let me say it, because I have owed it a long time, and I am too old to keep pretending I do not." The chairman folded his hands. "When your mother died, I locked one door in this house, but I locked a great many more that you could not see. I decided that a man does not weep, that a man does not need, that a man turns his grief into iron and calls it strength. And you were a boy, and you were watching, and you learned it the way boys learn everything, by watching the man who is supposed to know. Every cruel thing you became, I built the foundation for. I sealed your mother away and left you alone with the silence, and told myself I was protecting you. I was protecting myself. And it cost you 11 years. It was the first time in his life Seo-jin had seen his father's eyes wet. You could have lost me, Seo-jin said quietly. I nearly disappeared. I know. A servant I would once have looked straight through is the reason I did not. The old man almost smiled. There is a lesson in that. I intend to spend the rest of my years learning. He reached across the small table. This hard man who had built an empire and never once reached across anything. And he put his hand over his son's. I am sorry, my boy. For the door I locked, for the ones I could not. And Seo-jin, who had spent his whole life waiting for a tenderness from his father that never came, finally received it in a kitchen at a staff table, and the last sealed room inside him quietly came unlocked. The friends who had vanished came back exactly once. They came the day they heard that Chairman Beck had grown ill, suddenly and seriously, and that the question of who would run the family's holdings had become an open one. They came in their good coats with their easy smiles, ready to be Seo-jin's dearest companions again now that his name might soon be worth something after all, and they found him in the service corridor in a working man's clothes with a rag over his shoulder, and their smiles curdled. You cannot be serious, one of them said, echoing without knowing it the exact words Seo-jin had said to his father months before. You? Still playing servant? Do you know how this looks? I know exactly how it looks, Seo-jin said. Come out with us. Be who you were. Your father is half in the grave. The whole thing falls to you. You don't have to keep bowing to a dying man's guilt. The friend lowered his voice, and the real thing showed through at last. Give us a place at the table when it's yours. That's all. You always were the useful one to know. And there it was. The thing Regina had known about these men the first time she saw them at the gate, and the thing Seo-jin had spent his whole ruined youth refusing to see. They had never come for him. They had come for the name, the table, the useful thing he could hand them. Not one of them had called when he had nothing. Not one of them had asked how he was. Not once, in all the months he had been alone. The one man among them who had offered him a door out at the gate had offered it only to pull him back down to where they all still were. The only person in that entire house who had treated him like he was worth something, when he was worth nothing at all, was the woman he had burned with a pot of tea. Get out of my father's house, Seo-jin said quietly, and do not come back. I finally know what a friend looks like, and it is none of you. They went, and this time there was no false busyness to soften it, only the cold click of the gate closing, and Seo-jin stood alone in the corridor at the very bottom of the life he had been born at the top of. Everything stripped away, the money, the name, the fair-weather crowd, and he found, standing there in the quiet, that he was not afraid of it anymore. Because a man who has already lost everything that was real has very little left to fear from losing everything that was fake. Down the hall, in a room where the sun had not fallen in over a decade, Regina was singing. He walked toward the sound the way you walk toward a light. He found her in his mother's room. The locked door stood open. Regina had found the key on the kitchen table with the old man's note, and she had climbed the stairs and turned it, and she had opened the windows one by one, and the afternoon was pouring in gold across a room that had not seen the sun in 11 years. She had dusted the small things gently, the way you handle what belongs to the dead, and she was standing at the window, singing his mother's hymn into the light, soft and full. Seo-jin stood in the doorway of the room he had guarded, and feared for half his life, and then he crossed it. He walked to the center of the room where his mother had lived and died and been loved and mourned, and in front of the woman he had wronged, he lowered himself down onto his knees. Not to beg, to confess. Regina, Her name in his mouth was the steadiest thing about him. The first day you came here, I threw a plate at your head to see if I could make you cry. I burned your hand, and I called you clumsy, and I smiled, because your pain was the only thing in my life I felt I could control. I have spent 11 years making myself into a man that no decent person could love, and I nearly succeeded. I nearly disappeared entirely. He looked up at her, and there were no walls left in his face at all. And then you knelt down on my mother's floor, and you sang, and you would not break. And you told me the truth when everyone else in my life only ever told me what my name was worth. You saw a locked door and you knew there was grief behind it, when I did not even know that myself anymore. I heard you once, crying alone in the kitchen, thinking no one could hear, and I understood that your strength was never that you couldn't be hurt. It was that you decided every day not to become what hurt you. And I want to learn how to do that. I have wasted my whole life not knowing how. He drew a breath, and it shook, and he let it. I do not deserve your forgiveness. I know that. A man does not earn back in a season what he spent a lifetime destroying. But I am not asking you to forgive me because I deserve it. I am asking because you are the person who showed me that I could still be someone worth forgiving. And I would rather spend the rest of my life trying to become that man than one more day being the one who hurt you. The room was very quiet. The gold light lay across the floor between them. Regina held his gaze without hurry. She had been lied to before by men who wanted something. She knew the difference, in her bones, between a performance and a reckoning. And what she saw kneeling in front of her was not a performance. She had also heard, from a grateful old woman by way of a quiet chain of staff who noticed more than they let on, about a reference written and a wage given away with no name signed to it. She had said nothing, but she had known, and it had told her everything the apology now only confirmed. She reached out and she took his hands, the same hands that had once let a tray of tea fall on purpose, calloused now from months of honest work. "Get up," she said gently. "I don't need a man on his knees. I've spent my whole life around men who thought grand gestures could stand in for the small daily ones. Do you want to know what forgiveness looks like to me?" She drew him to his feet. "It looks like tomorrow, and the day after. It looks like the man you decide to be when no one is watching, and there is no debt to pay off. I already know what that man looks like, Seo-jin. I heard what you did for Bok-nam, and I know you never meant a soul to hear it. That is the man I forgive, not the one on his knees, the one who wrote that letter in the dark." His eyes filled. "You knew. I knew. Now show me that man every day, and you'll have more than my forgiveness." "What's more than forgiveness?" Regina smiled at him, the first full smile she had given him in all their months under that roof. "Company," she said. "For the road. It's a hard one, and it's shorter with somebody who knows your song." And she began, once more, to sing his mother's hymn, and this time, low and uncertain and then stronger, Seo-jin sang it with her, a grown man learning again the words he had been too afraid to remember, in a room full of light, standing beside the one person who had refused to let him disappear. If that moment reached you the way it reached me, take a second and subscribe. I write stories like this every week, about people who find their way back from the worst of themselves, and I would love for you to be here for the next one. Chairman Beck recovered slowly through the spring, and the house changed around his recovery. The first thing anyone noticed was that the maids stopped leaving. The service corridor, which had seen 11 women come and go in a single terrible year, grew quiet and steady and, in time, almost warm. Because the young master who had once made every one of them dread the sound of his step now worked beside them at 6 in the morning of his own free will, long after his father had lifted the punishment, and he learned their names, and he asked about their children, and he thanked them. He knew now that the housekeeper was called Ji Woo, and that she had given this house 19 years, and he said both of those things out loud, often, as if making up for all the years he had not. Young Hana, who had once trembled at his step, now argued with him cheerfully about how to fold a fitted sheet, and won. And Boknam came back. Not as a maid this time. Seo-jin found her better work than she had lost, honest and well-paid and kinder on old knees. And when she came to the house to thank a family she thought had finally grown a conscience, she recognized the young man drying dishes as the one who had once broken her, and she did not know what to say, and Seo-jin said it for her. He told her he was sorry, to her face this time, in front of everyone, the apology he had first made only with an unsigned envelope. She forgave him. People mostly do, when the sorry is real and the change is standing right in front of them. But the moment the whole household would remember came at a dinner. Chairman Beck, well enough now to hold court again, had invited old associates to the house, the sort of powerful and careful men who measured a family by how it carried itself. And one of them, a heavy man used to being the cruelest voice in any room, snapped his fingers at Regina as she served the wine and said, loud enough for the table to enjoy it, that the help in this house had gotten above themselves, and that a woman who looked like her should be grateful to hold a tray in a house like this at all. The old Seo-jin would have laughed. The old Seo-jin would have led the laughter. This Seo-jin set down his glass and stood up in front of every important man his family knew. That woman, he said, and his voice carried the way his father's carried, because he had finally earned the right to it, has more dignity in the hand I once burned than you have in your entire name. She is the reason there is anyone left willing to work in this house. You will apologize to her, in front of everyone who just heard you, or you will find your car, because you are not welcome under a roof she keeps. He held the man's eyes without a flicker. In this house, we do not measure a person by the tray they carry. We learned that the hard way. Some of us learned it later than we should have. The heavy man apologized. The table was silent, and then, from the head of it, Chairman Beck began, slowly, to smile, because the son he had nearly given up on had just stood and defended a servant against a room full of power, and had done it not for show, but because he believed it all the way down. Later, in the kitchen, Regina found Seo-jin drying the very glasses he had once shattered. You didn't have to do that, she said. I know, he answered. That's how I knew I wanted to. She looked at him a while, this man she had watched build himself back up from nothing, brick by honest brick. Your mother would be proud of who you're becoming, she said. I think she knew this man was in there. I think that's why she sang to him. Seo-jin had to turn back to the glasses for a moment before he could answer. Thank you, he said, for singing to him too. A year has a way of settling things, and the year that followed settled this house into something its walls had never held before. Regina stopped being a maid, though it happened so gradually that no one could say which day it changed. First, she was simply the person the staff came to when something went wrong. Then she was the person Chairman Beck asked to sit at his side when he reviewed the running of the household, because she saw the place more clearly than anyone who had lived in it their whole lives. Then, one quiet morning, the old man told her plainly that a woman who had held his family together with her bare hands ought to be treated as family. And he meant it, and from that day she was. She still hummed while she worked, because she would always work, because idleness had never once suited her. But now the house worked with her instead of grinding beneath her. Hana grew up in that house the way a plant grows toward a window. The frightened girl who had hidden behind rice sacks became the young woman who ran the whole downstairs staff with a laugh, and an iron sense of fairness she had learned from watching Regina carry the impossible without ever once dropping her dignity. Mrs. Han, who had warned so many women out that door, finally had a house she was proud to warn people into. Pil-su the groundskeeper found himself thanked so regularly that he stopped being startled by it, and the gardens, tended now by a man who felt seen, grew fuller than they had in years. Bok Nam sent a letter at the new year, addressed to the young master by name, and it said only that she hoped he knew what he had given back to an old woman who had thought her working years would end in bitterness. So Jin kept that letter in a drawer, and on the hard days, the days when the old cruelty stirred in its sleep and whispered that all of this was exhausting and none of it was owed, he took it out and read it, and remembered who he had decided to be. And Seojin and Regina found their way to each other the slow way, the true way, without a single grand gesture between them, because they had both had enough of grand gestures to last a lifetime. It was built instead out of the small daily things she had once told him forgiveness was made of. A cup of tea left where the other would find it. A hymn hummed in a hallway and answered from 2 rooms away. A hand found in the dark of a hard night. He never once, in all the years that followed, took her for granted, because he had learned in the most permanent way a man can learn it exactly what it costs to be looked through. And he had decided he would spend the rest of his life making sure the woman who had refused to look through him never went a day unseen. The house on the hill is still there, the gates still open for almost no one. But the locked door on the 2nd floor stays open now, and the light gets in, and fresh flowers sit on the sill because a woman who once buried her own people taught a grieving family how to keep a memory alive without sealing it in the dark. Chairman Baek grew old the way he had always wanted to, with a son beside him he was proud of, in a house that had finally learned to feel like one. And Regina stayed. Not as the maid who broke the curse of that house, though that is how the staff still tells it. She stayed as the woman who had walked into a place full of cold marble and colder people, carrying nothing but 2 suitcases, a photograph turned toward her pillow, and a hymn her grandmother taught her, and who had refused, through every cruelty they threw at her, to let that house make her hard. She had come to keep the floors. She left having taught a broken man how to be whole, and a proud man how to be tender, and a silent house how to sing again. Some mornings, if you passed the estate early, you could hear it drifting down over the wall. 2 voices now, an old hymn, and a home where there used to be a grave. That's where I'll leave them, and honestly, I don't think I've ever rooted for 2 people more. So tell me, did he deserve her forgiveness? Was it the plate, the tea, the letter he wrote in the dark for a woman he'd wronged, the night his so-called friends showed their true faces, or the moment he finally knelt down in his mother's room and told the truth? Drop your favorite part in the comments, and tell me where in the world you are watching from, because I read every one, and it genuinely makes my day. And if this story moved you even a little, subscribe so you never miss the next one. Thank you for being here. I'll see you in the next story.